You're live on Joy 99.7 FM. This is Ghana Connect. And so this week, something really unprecedented happened. Many have said before and have written volumes of literature on Parliament being a rubber stamp. Since 1992, it's been one of the major criticisms leveled against our Parliament. And so, when on Tuesday, the MPP MPs, at that time, just over 80 of them, held a press conference and then called out their own president, demanded that he sacks his own finance minister and a minister of state at the finance ministry immediately. Or else, guess what? They will boycott their own government's business in the House, the president's business. They will boycott it. There are many who felt, well, finally, Ghana's democracy is beginning to live up to the expectation. And we are redefining the frontiers of this young democracy. But if you held that view, you possibly may have felt very disappointed when just 24 hours later, the MPs did a massive U-turn. Let's sample what happened.
Oh my God.
It is hereby said that until such persons as aforementioned are made to resign or removed from office, we, members of the majority caucus here in Parliament, will not participate in any business of government by or for the president.
Of our side of government to remove our minister. But when push comes to shove, to save the party, the government, so whatever it takes.
So many times.
We find ourselves today. It's about credibility. The IMF is not taking care of writers seriously. No.
Another
Where we find ourselves today, it's about credibility. The IMF is not taking care of writers seriously, no matter what anybody says. Right? We have still not been able to achieve anything. If you're going to get any money to the system, probably be in January or thereabout. Right? But we are sinking. This so-called mantra of we have the men, it's like it's become a laughing stock. But we do have the men. So President Kufuor should deploy the men. Okay. What kind of education has Kufuor got? What kind of exposure that has he got that others haven't got? Okay. So sometimes by just putting a new face on a seat, we'll sort of bring confidence back to the economy, stabilize the markets for us to be able to go to these negotiations. That we are running a democracy. They're not running a family dynasty. Okay. That's what people must get into their heads. This party is not just about a certain group of people or a person. This party is about all of us.
Originally issued this statement, please said that the finance minister has lost credibility, and therefore this was affecting the discussions and the pace and the outcome of the negotiations. Their whole statement was premised on the need for change now. So their more recent statement has now also added them to those who have lost credibility.
The studio with me with views of their own on the 10 of events now. So now, as it stands now, we will have to wait for the IMF negotiations to be concluded, the budget read, and maybe the president would either sack him or he may decide to resign. But there's another lifeline here. The minority members have started a vote of censure this week. The Speaker of Parliament admitted that motion. Question is, so the MPs went public and said, well, we want the man gone. They gave all manner of reasons for it, some of them very, very strong. Well, the president asked them to give him time. Well, they have another option now. If they really, really want the man out, they can vote with the minority to enforce the vote of censure. Do you trust that these MPs will even muster the courage in secret to vote for this? My connectors are connected with me in the studio and on Zoom right now. Foss is a Ghanaian living in the UK. He's a broadcaster himself. And I love the UK because very similar to ours, right? In the last few weeks, they've had two prime ministers, two finance ministers. One of them, who also bears a Ghanaian name, was sacked because he tanked the economy. And so we want to tap into that. Well, what is it about them that they move pretty quickly on these matters that we don't? We'll stay in the UK for a while because we also will be connecting to a few more Ghanaians who live there. Stephen Senyo is a teacher, is a Ghanaian teacher studying in the UK and connects on Zoom as well. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Evans.
Great to have you. Great to have you, Stevie. I'm grateful that you could join me. Raymond is a youth activist. Raymond connects in the studio. Hello, Raymond.
Hello, Stephen. Hello, Evans. Sorry.
Yeah, well, don't worry. You're connecting with all of us, so it's fine. Frederick Brooks is a broadcaster also. Hello, Frederick.
Hello, Evans.
Felicity Nelson. Oh, my God. Felicity, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. Long time no talk.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Felicity is an activist. Yes, it's been. She's an activist and joins us. George Poku is also a Ghanaian. He's living in the USA. I'm pretty sure you know the midterms are up in the USA and the citizens are deciding the fate of these equivalent of our own members of parliament there. George, hello, George. George, thanks for connecting.
Hello, Evans. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, George. George, I'm pretty sure you'll be going to the polls to vote in the midterms. I want to hear your thoughts on this pretty quickly, how that compares to Ghana. But I want to start with you, Felicity. Let's start with Felicity. What do you make of the drama this week?
Okay. What do I make of it? Okay, so I think it's important to kind of put things in the right perspective. So on Monday, the NVC MPs, filed a motion in Parliament. And then on Tuesday, the MPP MPs also decided, so the NDC one was to have Ken Ofori-Atta removed. And the MPP also responded, 80 MPs responded by also saying, basically supporting the NDC move. And I thought it was a good move. However, I was quite skeptical about their intentions, because I felt that, a lot of these MPs, for example, like Nana Akufo-Addo, he has nothing to lose right now. He's not doing another term in terms of, he doesn't have to come back for our vote. He doesn't have to plead. He doesn't need to beg Ghanaians to vote for him. A lot of these MPs are probably going to be seeking re-election, so they're still very accountable to their constituents. So they have to be seen to be doing something, to be at least making some attempts. So I was wondering if they were doing it because they genuinely wanted Ken removed, or if it was because they need to do this game with their constituents to show that, oh look, I'm listening to you guys and this is the action I'm taking. However, I think that the fact that they still took a stand is still important. It's very good for our democracy. So I'll still commend them, even if not all their intentions were clean. At least Ghana benefits from them taking that stand. So I think it's a good thing. However, 24 hours later, you come back and say you're going to give the person some more time after having a conversation with the president. So that, for me, actually speaks to the fact that you took that action without being very clear as to what your objective was. Because in between those 24 hours, what could have possibly have been said to you for you to say, oh, actually, let me wait for him to finish? In the press conference, one of the things they said was that, the IMF negotiations were not going so well because of Ken, and he's part of the reason why it's being slowed down. And then a day later, you come back and you tell us that, oh, we're actually going going to wait for him to finish having these negotiations with the IMF and then maybe remove that at a later date. So were you wrong before or are you wronged now? Did you not have your fact? Why would you take such a strong stand without checking your facts? So then that definitely makes me question their motives. And I think that it's very, very unfortunate because when they did take that stand, so many Ghanaians were with them. Ken Musco was like trending on Twitter and everything. A lot of Ghanaians want Ken gone. A lot of Ghanaians. There's more Ghanaians who want the finance minister gone than the ones who want to retain him. So for them to have a conversation with the president and to come back the next day and say, oh, well, we're going to give him some more time. More time to do what? He's been there for 6 years. Why does he need more time? If what he couldn't do in 6 years, how is he going to do in the next few months?
I mean, you ask a very fundamental question. You bring the point up about many more Ghanaians agree with their first action on Tuesday than they agree with their second action when they did a U-turn. Frederick, let me bring you into this conversation. Something that Felicity said, this is about the people versus their representatives almost, right? I don't know if you also position in the conversation around that, because when you listen to them on Tuesday, they said the reason why they had to take this unprecedented step, because when they were on break, they went back to their constituencies. Their constituents told them that this is what they wanted. Yeah. And so if the president wasn't listening to them, then they had to go direct to their people through the media and say, we want him out. And then all of a sudden in 24 hours, it's changed back to listen to the president. Does it pitch them strongly against their own constituents?
Yeah, Evans, I would say that there is a huge disconnect between that of the executive and the citizens. I mean, I don't know whether it happens by coincidence. There had been several cases where citizens may have maintained a different position and the president also had a contrary position. Well, there had been a lot of times where some members of parliament or MPs or, ministers of state have been pointed out for irregularities or certain push out that does not really inure or does not really give a reflection of what a minister is supposed to actually be, where the president had actually named them or labeled them or classified them as outstanding. We can use the case of the health minister, where the president mounted a podium to say that, well, this is the most outstanding minister. I mean, the same narrative to that of the finance minister. It means that, well, the president does not resonate well with what the citizens hold. And I'm tempted to believe that there is this special qualities about the Minister of Finance that we are not seeing, but the president is the only one seeing it. And it becomes more problematic if ministers, members of parliament had actually convey, on national television saying that, well, these are the grievances or these are the petitions from their various constituencies, and there's an unprecedented number of, members of parliament. 80 members of parliament is not by an accident. So if at the end of the day, we can even draw this narrative that everything was fine until these 80 members of parliament who, in fact, wanted to redeem themselves from the fact that parliament had been described as a Roman stamp parliament. Well, everything was fine until they met the president, which should actually bring a matter of concern, because if the president is calling for calm, first of all, let's look at the initial position of the finance minister about the IMF. He saw the IMF as a no-go area. At the end of the day, IMF became something that was eminent for us to go. In fact, at the end of the day, the president is calling for a minister who does not even believe or who never believed in a particular cause to lead the cause and seal the deal before, whether a decision is going to be made, whether he should go home or not is made. I feel the president is jumping the gun. It's draw the narrative of you thinking that someone is going to get married to someone and the person is a monster. You tell the father of the person that, well, your daughter is going to end up in the hands of a monster. The father tells you that, well, wait, after the wedding, we'll look at that. I think it doesn't make sense anyway. I think, we are in a position where there must be some contingent measures, to be taking place. And if the president is saying that after this, the sealing of the IMF deal, that is where we can look at certain considerations. For me, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway.
Raymond, which constituency are you in? What's your constituency?
Ketu South.
Oh, okay. So your MP is NDC.
Yes.
So I'm pretty sure then you're happy with the way the NDC is handling this than what the MPs are doing.
Yes, I would
or
say,
you think they're all in the same boat on this matter?
I'd say, but the point is that it is long overdue. This call should have been made a long time ago. while I would want to applaud them for standing with the people of Ghana, I believe that these actions should have been expedited earlier before now. Now, there is one point that we must not belabor. The point is that the finance minister is a disaster that must be mitigated with a sense of urgency. Now, as a young person, and for our fledgling democracy, when I heard that a certain 80 majority MPs in parliament have come out to say clearly that they are not going to do any business on behalf of the president or on behalf of the government if the finance minister is not kicked out, resonated with me very much that for once, in our parliament, majority and minority MPs are collaborating with a sense of unity or with a sense of responsibility that they solely owe to the constituent, the people who queued and voted for them in power. Then just 24 hours later, now the number increased from 80 to 95. They come to tell us that they had a crunch meeting with the president. The president indicates to them that they would have to allow the finance minister to read a budget. Now, the question that keeps recurring in my mind is that in 2021, when the finance minister, was taken ill, when he was indisposed, and when he was recuperating outside the shores of this country, was a budget not read in this country? Was a certain appropriation bill not passed in this country? Did government not dispense funds from the national treasury? And so, what is this argument that the finance minister must be made to read a budget? All of the budgets that the finance minister has read.
But he has to be prepared first, right? And they need his input. They've already probably started the process that he's supervising.
In preparation of the budget, does the finance minister, who is solely a figurehead, prepare the entire budget himself? No, he does not. The point I was also making is that in the previous years, when the finance minister read, the Ahunto budget and Koso budget and all of those, what did that add to the well-being of the citizenry? The only thing we saw was excruciating hardship. The only thing that those budgets brought to us was to rattle the financial market. The only thing he reading those budgets brought to us was humongous deficits. Those were the only things.
So you're saying that on Tuesday, the MPs won you over?
Yes.
And then on Wednesday, you sort of got disappointed in them again.
I mean, you see,
okay, that's an interesting mood swing there.
It's a whole dilemma.
I guess stay with me. Let me expand the call and bring other connectors into the conversation. Stephen is joining us from the UK. Stephen, you live in a country that has very interesting last few weeks shown us how it should be done. Although, of course, they call theirs political turmoil. You hear they talk about it, but that's the turmoil that I guess if you speak to Raymond, Felicity, and Frederick, they would rather welcome when MPs have deciding to resign or are being sacked than have one person in power who, as they suggest, doesn't represent the interest of the majority of the people. What's your take on this from your vantage point of the United Kingdom?
Thank you very much, Evans, and it's been nice listening to Felicity and my brothers in the studio on their interesting talk. I feel that observing things from the UK perspective, what a huge difference I see the fact that people are ready to accept responsibility for their wrongs and pay the consequences. And you could see this not only from the recent sacking or resignation of the finance minister or the home secretary, who simply sent an email from her personal email address and has to resign for that. It's been the case in previous years where if people are entrusted into public office, it comes with a huge level of responsibility as well as accountability. And this is accountability not only from the state or from citizens, but also self-accountability, people holding themselves to high standards such that if you know that you have misconducted yourself grossly, you do not wait for someone to sack you and you resign in good faith. And this has been the case with Boris Johnson after all the turmoil having to step down and with the second prime minister. Coming to what's happening in Ghana, I would agree with Felicity and what my other colleagues in the studio have mentioned, that there's no debate about whether the finance minister should continue to stay in office or not. And that is especially because, in principle, this is someone who has on several occasions held views that are contrary to that of the president or the executive in general, starting from something like the free senior high school policy, where the finance minister thinks that he does not believe that people who have the means to pay school fees for their children should have that waived by government. And by principle, if you are in an office and you disagree with how things should go, you don't stay there and act against your own principles on conviction. That is the first example. And the second instance that have been alluded to by my colleagues is he, as a finance minister, on record to have said that Ghana should not go to IMF because it will not go, it's not going to help us. And after making it categorically clear that the IMF is not an option, I think that at that point where the country has the head there, it was honorable for him as the minister to resign and accept that he has not managed affairs well. But it goes back to the point that people are slow in accepting responsibility, standing by their principles, and paying the consequences.
But isn't that why you have a parliament that is by design? The checks and balances all established by its architecture to become a check on the executive, so that the man himself, obviously, I guess the framers of our constitution anticipated that if you leave the man himself there, he won't resign. So it puts the power in somebody else's hands. In this case, the members of parliament who have been given a power to activate a vote of censure, for example. Isn't that why that is there?
So, Evans, I think that if you understand our political landscape, you'd realize that the NDC and MPP political dynamics it's ongoing, and the fact that this political rivalry continues to rule affairs sometimes over the national interest, continues to meddle in a decision-making process. And it was very bold and plausible action for the majority MPs to take a bold stand, and I think, like others have said, they deserve all commendation for that. However, after meeting your head of government, who is responsible for making appointments, who would put MPs on boards or decide who becomes MP or deputy minister or who is serving in which position or not, I feel that the president continues to hold enormous power, such that the ruling government's MPs do not have the level of independence they would have to carry out their duties, because you wouldn't want to be on the bad side of your president.
Yeah, but you touched on a very sensitive nerve there, that they really do not have the independence. And I want to bring in George connecting with us from the USA. I mean, George, that's a really fascinating observation from Stephen there. Do you agree? Hello, George. George, please unmute for me. I can see you're talking, but I can't
okay.
hear you. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yes, Evans. There are a couple of things. Stephen went back to you brought about the Constitution. The Constitution was written at a time that we had somebody that we were scared was not going to accept that Constitution. So a lot of powers were given to the executive that the executive should never have had. That notwithstanding, we need to look at this situation quite closely. Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo is asking for somebody that does not believe or is going to take Ghana forward to be kept in place to negotiate a deal for us that Ghanaians will have to live with. That is like the UK allowing people like Farage and co to take them out of the Brexit, and now you have people like Boris Johnson, Les Truss, and things like that having to go through whatever was set up that they were not even totally sold out to, now having to deal with the repercussions of it. When you start tracing the English issue, you would realize that most of the underlying thing comes from the Brexit. But in Ghana, let's come to the crux of the issue. One, the parliamentarians, the 80 that stood up and decided to hold that press conference, I think did not even have the constituents at heart, because conversation conversation that went on with Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, they would have stuck to their guns and not say that they have made a U-turn now. They want him to stick around. This man does not believe in what he is doing. He is negotiating a deal that, if we believe Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, which personally I have my sentiments about, but if he is negotiating a contract for us that the country is going to live with, don't you think we need him? We need him longer than him just negotiating and walking out, because he knows the foundation on which this whole thing was built. The budget, like your panelist in the studio said, has been read without him before, and he is not the one putting together the numbers. They put together the numbers, they present it to him. He sits in the room with them, they go over it, and at the end of the day, they come up and say, yes, we believe this is acceptable, let's go with that. So all these excuses that are being given by these MPs tells me quite frankly that, one, the interest of the constituents was never and will never be the interest of the politician. The politicians want to retain their seats.
But George, let me challenge that a bit. On Tuesday, when they called that press conference, whose interests were they serving when they called the press conference and made the demands that the president should sack him or they will not participate?
They were serving their own interests.
Even when they were.
What I'm saying, it was just. Yes, even when they were asking the government to sack him, they were serving their interests because they wanted to have plausible deniability that they do not condone with what is going on in the Ministry of Finance and what is going on with the economy. And the only way they can get that plausible deniability is to be able to be listed among those numbers that we are not in support of what is going on. We have your interest at heart, because if they really did, 24 hours was not going to let them turn around.
In other words, what happened on Tuesday was just a proper. We were all being conned by these MPs. It wasn't honest and sincere.
That directly.
Felicity, do you agree with that assertion? That even on what happened on Tuesday, it wasn't done because they had your interest at heart?
Well, like I said earlier, if you were being led by conviction, you're not going to, because before this happened, surely they would have had conversations with some members of the executive, tried to probably seek audience with the president. They wouldn't have just gotten up, just woken up in the morning, decided 80 of us, let's go and do this press conference. And then for 24 hours later, nothing has changed. Nothing has, the people who wanted you to remove Ken haven't changed their minds. So why should the president change your mind? But I wanted to also just quickly also touch on the fact that we keep talking about the IMF, but we don't even, Ghana has been to the IMF like 17 times, right? And the IMF is not your friend. Like, we have these conversations a lot of the time. There's no nuance regarding like the fact that the IMF is painted like a savior. Yes, they are not a savior. Like the program. So even Ken disagree. Not wanting to go to IMF for me is something that the only problem is he was being driven by his ego. And he wasn't looking at the facts. He didn't have much of a choice, but he prolonged it. And that's part of the reason why we are where we are today. But it's actually a good thing. I hope that if we actually get our fundamentals right, we wouldn't need to be going to organizations like the IMF and being held to all of these programs, because a lot of these programs do not inure to the benefit of the average person, of the average citizen. Like, the IMF is not here. They don't care about the well-being of Ghanaians. That's not what they exist for. That's not their mandate. So we have to really appreciate that. But the thing is, until we get our ducks in order, we start putting the right things in place, we will continue to be going to organizations like the IMF, and we're going to continue to see these problems. What is the point of going to the IMF 17 times? 17 times. If you had a child and you sent them to school and they failed 17 times, would you still be sending them to school?
I mean, so let's now switch this a bit. I mean, so all of you agree that the members of parliament, even on Tuesday, the MPP MPs who went public, they were not representing the constituents' best interest. This was all part of a setting smoke screen. If that's the case, then, and you put them there, you all elected these MPs to represent your interest, what have you, the employers, done about it? Or what are you willing to do about it? I mean, because this has been, several days now since this happened. Frederick, I want to bring you in here because ultimately, that MP who you're criticizing today, you employed him, right? So if you only complain on Twitter and radio, then what's the point of this? I mean, how much responsibility do you accept
Right.
for how your employee is acting on your behalf?
Right. Evans, with the trend of elections in Ghana, it will be quite difficult to hold some people by their horns because of some dynamics. It will shock you that the posture or the position of a party chairman can even go, I mean, will be quite contradictory or contrary to the initial position by our members of parliament. I've heard some party executive threatening some, members of parliament that they are going to lose their seat should they maintain their position that the finance minister is sacked. I think that the fundamental issue is that we have a problem at hand. And I keep on talking about the contingent measures that we are supposed to put in place, how we are supposed to do away with certain things that we feel will not inure to the benefit of the nation. This is not the very first time the members of parliament had spoken to the president. And for me, when I watch the posture of a very honorable, member of parliament, Apia Kubi, you realize that they just wanted to paint the picture that the president was intolerable because they said that he had explored all avenue before coming on national television. And for me, if you speak to an elderly person and, something you feel should be confidential or secretive, if you speak to an elderly person continuously and he's not listening, that is where you come to public to speak. Now, at the end of the day, you spoke to the Ghanaian populace, and a lot of us resonated with the minister, with the members of parliament, especially when this, a very important arm of government had been, with all due respect, caught up with a lot of controversies, looking at the fist fight on the floor of parliament, voting, on the e-levy and whatsoever. And we have this very important opportunity to redeem, that particular arm of government, and they still seem to, give an impression that.
Yeah, but it comes back to my question, right?
Yes.
It's okay to complain,
Right.
but do you appreciate
Right.
that he is your employee?
Yes.
And that's, I'm just want to switch this
Right.
onto the citizen, because this
Right.
is a citizen conversation.
Right.
So we've complained the whole week. We're still complaining about the actions,
Right.
okay? But that doesn't change anything.
Well, so if
How much responsibility should citizens accept for what's happening?
yes, I really get your question very clear. It is
Did you
not-
even agree that you have to accept, like, part of the blame should be taken by citizens?
Well, we should accept because we live in a nation where people do not even vote based on policies. People vote because of food, people vote because of money, people vote
Evans.
because of
Yeah.
several
give me a
variables
second.
that is
George
quite
wants to interact.
disappointing.
Hello, George.
Right.
Yes, Evans, there is a basic problem that we are all overlooking. You can blame the citizens for all you want, but ask yourself, when you were growing up, how much civic education was put on our TVs, on radio and things like that made us being empowered to do the right thing. Now, that amount of civic education is not going on because an educated populace is negative to what the politicians want to do, because then these populace are going to understand what is actually going on. So the Ghanaian politicians want to keep the populace uneducated civically, and that is where we are, and that is why the citizens cannot be blamed, because even though there is a proliferation of radio stations and things like that, and you can have programs in Chi, in Ever, in Hausa, in Ghana, all of that, nobody from the Ministry of Communication is spending the money to put civic educational programs on these radio stations.
George, are you suggesting then, and I want to put this to everybody, that in the face of all that I've heard citizens complaining about this week, that we are still powerless and helpless in the face of all that we are seeing? Stephen, first have a take on that question for me. Is it a suggestion that, you can blame the citizens? So are we powerless, agentless, as they call it, in the face of what is happening?
Evans.
Yes, Felicity.
Yes, I agree. We're not angry enough. we sit back, we say, hey, you go buy everything, it's gone up. You're like, hey, and then we sit back and we do nothing. If it comes to like actually standing up, going to protest, people will not leave their homes, they can't be bothered, even though the issues are affecting them. But there's this sense of powerlessness that Ghanaians feel, and we don't even appreciate how much power we have. Do you think that if tomorrow 1 million people went onto the street to protest against Ken Ofori-Atta, it will be very difficult for the president to say that he's not going to remove him? He will be scared. He will be scared. But you sit in all we do, and especially the middle class, educated ones, all we do, we have these little conversations, write a little Facebook post, but we're never really ready to stand up and be counted. And some of us, some people are just waiting for the opportunity to also join the loot, to be part of the elite, so they don't have to have these problems. But we're not really, when it comes to us being angry and standing up for our country, standing up for ourselves, we rarely ever do that. And it's a real disappointment. So until we're angry enough, these politicians will continue to take us for a joke. The MPs will do what they did, because they know that when they did that, if they got to their constituency, and maybe if they were chased, like the way they chased, what's his name, the Suhum, I'll say Chambers, maybe next time they wouldn't do that again. We're not angry enough. So
interesting thoughts. I mean, Raymond, what do you make of what Felicity just said there? That ultimately we're just not showing enough agency.
Yeah, Evans. And so I think that the Ghanaian people, the electorate, we have exercised our constitutional responsibility or duties by voting these people into power. And then in the wisdom of the framers of the Constitution, they know that to the extent of voting representatives into positions of authority, there's very little we can do to checkmate them. Okay. And that is why the Constitution makes provision for, state institutions. That is why we have check and balances and all of those to be able to checkmate the people that we give responsibilities to, and to ensure that they live up to those expectations, to those responsibilities, and to those duties. And so for me, I think that it would be unfair to apportion blame to the people who voted these people into power, right? Now, in the face of this excruciating hardship that we are experiencing, you would attest that openly, publicly, you see people exercising a vote of no confidence in this government by hooting at the president almost at every function. You saw the show that was held in Accra recently. Even in their own MPP, in their stronghold, in Kumasi, when they're in their convoy, you see people hooting at them. The only way I think that we are not doing really much as a people is the anger. We are not showing the frustration, the agitation. We are not really demonstrating that we are fed up. Now you see, Martin Kpebu, Esquire, made a very profound statement during the weekend. He said that from time to time, right, the foundations of a democracy must be watered and soaked with the blood of patriotic citizens. And that is the point where we have gotten to. It is
within the confines of the law.
Yes, within the confines of the law, let me say, but that is where we've gotten to. It is not to incite any form of insurgence, but we must, within the remit of the law, register our displeasure, our agitation, our frustration. Before I came here, right, I was contemplating over something that really made me so angry, so frustrated. It is the fact that, Ken Ofori-Atta has developed a certain predilection for borrowing, such that every borrowing he does, the more he plunges into economic distress, the more his private company benefits. Okay.
Well, that's an allegation that went conflict of interest. It went to the Straj. Straj looked at it and fundamentally came to a conclusion.
You see, we shouldn't
that
play
there wasn't
the ostrich.
enough there.
You
Part
see,
of it had gone to court.
We shouldn't play the ostrich.
No, but I mean, my point is fundamentally.
Yes, I get your
point. It has been adjudicated on by the Straj, conflict of interest in this matters, and has been decided.
Yes.
And so,
yes, you make money or not.
Evans, Ken Ofori-Atta actively holds shares.
Yeah, I mean,
in data bank.
Yeah, I mean, that's my point. My point is that repeating it's gone the full haul in terms of it's been looked at by the Straj, etc., and even gone to the court.
Yes,
and has been decided.
So
my point is, whatever you think about it,
yes,
the court of competent jurisdiction, the institutions empowered to do so, have already looked at it. I mean, so it won't change what the
Yeah,
facts
no,
are. But just a second, because of time, I want
Let
to
me
get
just
Stephen.
finish quickly.
Just a second, because I want Stephen to also just a second. Yeah, go on.
Okay.
Learn from
And
me
so
because
you see,
of
it is
time.
not just limited to that. While I think his company is still benefiting from the excessive borrowing that is going on, now the program that the IMF is going to be given to us, they are actually suggesting debt restructuring.
Yeah.
What that is going to mean for investors is that if you have treasury bill, if you have invested your
you have to
resources-
take a haircut.
Yeah.
I mean, let's hear some of the social media comments as we wrap up, because my colleague Nathaniel Lato is taking over with sports. Yes, what are people saying on this matter as we wrap up?
Evans, this one is coming from Ni at Bubuashi and says, our politicians like Ghanaians always put their selfish interests ahead of the country. So I'm not surprised with the U-turn of the majority, you mean. And let us not continue deceiving ourselves. I feel those MPs are part of people within MPP who are harboring some bitterness in them against the president. This one from Frederick says, you have a vehicle, you give it to a driver, you take it to Kumasi. Your driver is driving the vehicle recklessly, drunk driving. Some passengers gather and ask the driver to do better and ask you to actually sack the driver. Then you tell them that let's get to halfway through the journey, let him complete the journey, then I can sack him. But that's the analogy that he's giving here. So as for the 80 MPs, the least said, the better. That's from Frederick once again. And the last one we will read here is Evans. And as much as we want to blame the members of parliament for their youth, and let's consider it a note of caution to those that vote for them and the presidents. This is from Ben from Alajo. Evans, these are the messages that we have from our listeners.
Listen, this is a conversation that definitely I know it evokes a lot of passions on the matter, and we'll return to it as we begin to examine what may happen or may not happen with this economy going forward. George, grateful. Raymond, thank you very much for connecting. Felicity, always exciting listening to you on these matters. Stephen and Frederick as well. Qatari Quest quiz is up next. The quarterfinals is up. People are winning some interesting prizes at the end of all of this. Nathaniel Lato is next.